Hi ladies, welcome to the second to last week of construction of the Juju tree skirt. We are going to talk this week about how to put your top together. At this point you should have all of your wedges sewn together and you should have figured out what order you want your wedges to be in. And now in this video I'm going to explain to you how to sew them together. This is really important because this is the first tree skirt I made and I'm going to show you there's a problem with it. The problem is when you lay it really flat, these wedges overlap. And that's a problem when we're going to put the backing on, because if this is on top of this and we're trying to put it on a flat piece of backing, it's a mess. What I ended up having to do was sew an extra piece of backing on when the backing was half attached, and we don't want you to have to do that because I'm not entirely certain I could even explain to you how to make that work. So if you get your tree skirt sewn together and it's overlapping like this, you're going to want to sign up for help days, and we're going to have several help days after the 1st of November. Where you can come and we're going to help you attach your backing or help you solve that problem if you have that problem. Hopefully the video today will help you avoid it, but we'll see. So this is the second tree skirt that we've made, and you'll see here that these guys are lying, it's all laying in a circle and they're not overlapping. And that's what we're going for today. That's what we're going to try to show you how to do. So when you're done, you want to lay it out and then you want to make sure it's laying flat. And if it isn't laying flat, then give us a call, come in, rewatch the video, and we will try to help you figure out what the problem is. But you're not going to want to sew your backing on if it isn't laying flat, okay? Okay, so at this point, and these are Jan's wedges. She was generous enough to let us have her wedges so that we can show you how to sew these together. At this point, your wedges should look like this. You should have your 3 pieces sewn together. I know there were a couple of you waiting to do that until you had all of your blocks made so that you could figure out where you wanted things lined up. If you haven't sewn your wedges together yet, then what you're going to want to do is, let's see, sew on the lines. When you're done, you have these 2 lines on the back here. To sew your wedges together, you'll line them up and you'll sew between those 2 lines, okay? There's also our very first video from our first week shows you how to sew the wedges together in more detail. You can go back and rewatch that video if you want, and it'll give you a better method. Today we're going to talk about sewing the wedges together. The wedges that just have stars up here, they're easier to line up. I'm going to show you how to do this with the reindeer, because what you want is you want those reins to match up when you sew them together. All of the reins are at the same point. So if you have moved these guys around, that's okay. It's no big deal. They'll line up just fine because they're the same distance from the top to the reins in every single one of those pieces. Okay, so when you're ready to go, when you've got it all lined up and laid out and figured out where you want, you're going to look at the back. And what I've done is, because you sewed, these lines are all sewn in white bobbin thread, so they're going to be hard to see. So I drew over them with a friction pen so that you could see what it is we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to lay the 2 wedges together, and then we're going to use pins, and we're going to find that rein where the reins are. And when we sew them together, we're going to sew just inside this second line, this innermost line, and we're still going to sew just inside of it. So to line your reins up, you're going to find where they intersect with this inner line, and you're going to put a pin just inside of it, okay? So that you can see on the other side where it's coming out. Now you're going to do the same thing over with Santa. We're going to find where the reins, we're going to use our pin and we're going to stick it through. And you can see my pin here is coming out between the 2 lines. So that's not where we want to line up. We want to move it just a little bit more towards Santa. whoop, I didn't stick it through straight. And there we go, we have Santa, we have the pin just inside the line through Santa's reins and just inside the line through the reindeer's reins. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna make sure our edges here, our raw edges are lined up, and we're gonna use that pin to hold those two together. Now I've seen a lot of people in class, they take their pin and they wanna go this way. You don't wanna do that. I know that sewing machine manufacturers tell you not to sew over pins. That's really great advice. But when we are trying to line up the reins like this and we do not want this spot to move, we need to be able to sew over that pin. So you want to put the pin perpendicular to your seams. Now we want to line up the corner at the top the same way. So you're going to find where your line of stitching, your innermost line of stitching makes a corner. You're going to put it through your pin through there. You're going to do the same thing on your other one. Make sure your raw edges are lined up and put your pin in. I'm also going to put pins in both of my these seams where the blocks are joined. But remember, I told you to leave those seams to start at the seam lines, so you're going to have gaps, and that's fine. It actually makes it a little bit easier to line things up. So you're going to go back into here where the seams are joined. Yep. Okay. I just bent my pin. And then this last one down here, same thing. You want to use the strongest pins you have. And here I was just trying to get it through, make sure, whoop, now I had it. You've got it through the seam here, and you want it through the seam on the bottom. Okay, so exactly where those two pieces are joined. Now, the whole time I was checking without telling you I was doing it, you want the raw edges lined up the whole way from top to bottom. And if there is a lot of fabric, here there's just your fabric and your SF101. When you get back here, we've got stabilizer, batting, fabric, SF101 times 2. So what your machine wants to do is separate them. It wants to, your machine always is looking for the path of least resistance, and a lot of times it'll push things out of the way. So we want to make sure that our machine isn't going to be able to do that. And we want to make sure that our raw edges are lined up the whole way, and they're going to stay lined up.
Are you going to use a walking foot?
I am not going to use a walking foot. You definitely could, actually, I didn't put a walking foot on the machine, but I did use a walking foot when I sewed the other one together. So I'm going to change it real fast to a walking foot. While I'm doing that, I'm going to tell you that I used, I'm using Aurifil to sew it together. Superior Pima cotton would also be fine. You can use embroidery thread if you want to. I don't like to sew with embroidery thread because it's shiny. So I don't want any of this. If this thread shows, I don't want it to attract attention to itself by shining. I'm using just a creamy color Aurifil that matches the background fabric pretty well. It's actually Aurifil, it's 2311. But now, when I'm going to sew, I am going to sew just inside this line. So I'm going to try to sew not on this line, but just like towards the reindeer here, towards all the stitching, because that's how we're going to suck in some of the extra fabric that I showed you was a problem on the first tree skirt. I'm going to start at the innermost line of stitching at the top where that corner is. I'm going to start right there, and I am going to backstitch at both the beginning and the end. Whenever I'm sewing large sections of a project together, I always backstitch. Whenever I'm attaching borders or the last row on a quilt, I always backstitch. This project, we're holding a lot of stuff together, so we're gonna do our best we're gonna give it the back stitches to help. Okay, so I've got it in here. I manually drop my needle to make sure it's where I want it to be. So I'm gonna sew, I'm actually lining up this line of stitching with just so it's out right along, yeah. This line of stitching is gonna run right inside this edge of the foot. So almost between this edge of the foot and the needle dropping is what I'm gonna try to do. Okay, I'm gonna try to keep my fingers out of the way. And my stitch length is at 1.8. Just like if I was piecing and I did the back stitches there. And I'm not gonna go real fast because again, if I let go, the machine is trying to, it wants to sew over here is what it wants to do. So we are not going to let that happen. I am gonna pull this one out because it was just helping me. Make sure, double check my raw edges. They're together. Okay, we're coming to the reins, and this part is important, so. Okay, when we get to these where the seams are pressed open, if you want to, you can take a friction pen and draw a line, okay? And match up your inner seams here and your seams here. I didn't do that. I've now sewn 2 tree skirts together, so I'm getting pretty good at eyeballing it. And I didn't. There we go. When we get to the end, I'm going to sew to the inner seam, and then I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm going to be done. Now, when I open it up, I'm most worried about the reins. Whoop, got that one up there. Okay, the reins are perfect. You are going to have pieces where your seams match up perfectly, and then every once in a while, for whatever reason, you'll probably get one where you can't get these seams to match up perfect. That's okay. I asked a couple of people last week who were saying they never noticed my seam lines here aren't perfect on the first tree skirt. I focused on the reins. So I'm gonna sew one more wedge on for you guys so you can see how this works. And then we're gonna turn you loose to do it yourself. So this guy, we're gonna line up. I start with the reins. And then we line up the top corner. And then our seam lines, and we're making sure our raw edges are nice and even. Get really heavy duty pins out. I've already bent 2. I think I just bent a 3rd one. Make sure. And then make sure your seam. And what I was saying before about getting over the big seams was this. if you, I lost my friction pen. Oh, here it is. If you have trouble sewing over these, what you want to do is you want to take your, here's the seam line, so you can see it. And what you'll do is take your ruler and you can draw a line, so you have a line to see, to connect up your seam line over the seam allowances. And then you're gonna sew again just inside that line, okay? So I'm gonna sew one more time, and then turn you guys loose. The other thing you need to know is I sewed this in 2 halves. I always put the, once you have more than one piece sewn, that you're sewing, more than 2 pieces, I put the larger piece on the bottom and the smaller piece on the top. I found it got very unmanageable after I got half the tree skirt together, so I sewed half my skirt and then I sewed the other half and then I laid those 2 on top of each other, and it was a lot easier to manage. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the beginning, and again I'm sewing with the seam line between the edge of the presser foot and my needle to the best of my ability.
What if they're making a table?
If you're making a table topper, this part is exactly the same. It's even more important that it lays flat, because a tree skirt that is a little puckery is a pain to put the backing on, but no big deal once it gets under the tree. A puckery table topper is something that people might notice. And after you spent all this time on this beautiful piece, you don't want to not use it. So okay. Okay. So here we are again. Take the pins out. In the moment of truth, we've got it lined up again. Now, if you open it and it's not lined up, you don't want to, don't cry, don't scream, don't go stab your husband with your seam ripper. Instead, what I usually did was I ripped out from the top to just below the reins, and then that usually gave me enough space to adjust it, and re-stick your pin in and try again. Okay, the last thing I was going to tell you was, this took about 2 hours for me to sew together. Once you've got it sewn together, you want to flip it over and you want to press everything open really nice and flat. Then you want to lay it on your floor and you want to see if your ends meet up nicely or if they're overlapping. If they're overlapping, don't despair, okay? We're going to have help days, like I said, after in November. But it would be best if you came to those help days knowing what the problem already was. If you come to the help days to sew your top together, it's not going to be nearly as helpful, because the backing, while it's not hard, it's not complicated, it's kind of bulky and it's a little bit time consuming, and it's the part where I actually think a lot of people are going to need help, and we'll have another video for you in 2 weeks, okay? So get your top sewn together, sew inside that innermost line, and then lay it on the floor, and if it lays flat, then you are done. Give yourself a big congratulations, and you can go on with your day. If it doesn't lay flat, don't despair. Go look and see if you've got seams that need to be adjusted. Otherwise, we will see you in the shop for help.
Okay,
days.
and by overlapping,
The end overlapping. If you
Right.
get to the end,
but it means that with the seam turned in,
right.
see, you have to,
Yeah, this piece has this innermost seam seam allowance turned in.
So does the other one. So those might overlap. You have to turn those back.
Yeah, you want it, because this is how it's gonna lay when it's,
When you put the backing
yeah,
on.
okay? All right, there is encouragement for you in your stocking this week, even though there's actually nothing to pick up. I decided that maybe you could use a little encouragement to help you get through this. I know a lot of you are scared about it. Don't be scared. It's really not hard. Like I said, it took me about 2 hours to sew everything together and press it, so not bad at all. All right, we'll see you guys soon.